So our solidarity and compassion is with those innocent victims of this unprovoked war of aggression by Vladimir Putin. Within a single day, history returned, but seemingly the outlook on the future has been destroyed for many by the decision of a single man, Vladimir Putin, and his innermost circle. We don't know how this horrible situation will end. It is still evolving, and much is covered by the fog of war. But one thing seems inevitable: an update on our understanding of what happened and is happening inside Russia. Because to a large extent, and this has nothing to do with understanding Putin or Putin being a Putin understander, Russia has become a black box for us. We have been wrong too often, and we are witnessing this every day today. So today's objective is therefore to contribute to a more realistic assessment of where Russia under Putin is headed and the conclusions we ought to draw from this. And I would welcome very much our two distinguished speakers, because we could not have wished for a better panel to discuss this difficult topic in these days than Katja Gloger and Mikhail Zygar. Let me briefly introduce them. Katja Gloger studied Eastern European history, politics, and Slavic studies in Hamburg and Moscow. In 1989, she was sent to Moscow as a correspondent for the weekly magazine Stern. There, she experienced the end of the Soviet Union and the rise of New Russia. She interviewed Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and also Vladimir Putin, whom she was the first Western correspondent to accompany for months. She headed the foreign department of Stern in Hamburg and was the political correspondent in Washington. In 2010, she received the prestigious Henry Nannen Award in the documentary category. In 2014, she was named Political Journalist of the Year. Today, she works as a freelance journalist and book author focusing on Russia and security policy. Her books include Putin's World, The Story of a Fateful Relationship, and Outbreak, Inside Views of a Pandemic. Mrs. Gloger is also an executive member of the board of directors for Reporters Without Borders. And I think that throughout the discussion today, she might give us an insight of what this prestigious organization is undertaking for journalists that are having difficulties operating in these hard times. Our second panelist is Mikhail Zygar, who's a Russian journalist, writer, and filmmaker, and the founding editor-in-chief of the only Russian independent news channel, Dozhd, which is now being forbidden and has been forbidden a couple of weeks ago already. Under his leadership, Dozhd provided an alternative to Kremlin-controlled federal TV channels by focusing on news content and giving a platform to opposition voices. The channel's coverage of politically sensitive issues like the Moscow street protests in 2011 and 12, as well as the conflict in Ukraine, has been dramatically different from the official coverage by Russia's national television stations. Zygar is also the author of the book, All the Kremlin's Men, The History of Putin's Russia, based on interviews with Russian politicians from Putin's inner circle. The book has become an outstanding bestseller in Russia, and is also being translated into German. So it is available in our bookstores here. In recent weeks, he's contributed to the New York Times, Der Spiegel, FAZ, and appeared on BBC and CNN for live interviews. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our two distinguished panelists for being with us and speaking to us and discussing with us today. And enough of me. Let me address the first question to Katja Gloger. Katja, in your recent book on Vladimir Putin, you've been very clear and concise on what to expect from Vladimir Putin. You warned about him, and you warned about where the country is headed. Why do you think we didn't see this coming? And what do you think is Putin's objective with the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the friendly introduction. Although it's a little bit funny to be in Cassandra's position, you know, Cassandra's prophecies always turned out to be true. So I'd rather like, you know, my little prophecies not to be true. But so far, no good news on that front. What did we miss? What did we misread? In order to circle this question, I think I'd like to take you back 10 years ago almost to a day in March 2012, Vladimir Putin was re-elected president. You might remember, it seems like an eternity ago, that after the so-called castling, when President Medvedev, who embarked into a new era of reset with the United States, when he proposed that Vladimir Putin should be re-elected president again, was rather an order than a proposal. And people in Russia, especially the younger people in the cities, they went on the street and started to demonstrate against this reshuffling. It were tens of thousands of people, 100,000 in Moscow demonstrating for political participation. Putin, nevertheless, was re-elected president in March 2012, and right after this, he started even with more repressions against any opposition voices. He enforced the already authoritarian structures into even more autocratic structures of power, and he started to talk about things that seem strange to us. He started to talk about a genetic code of the Russian people. He started to talk about a purely Russian civilization of ethnic Russians that were left outside Russia's borders after the fall of the Soviet Union, people that had to be brought home, so to say, again. And he early on positioned himself and his country, and I think this is what we missed early on, as an antagonist to the West. Russia as a designated superpower, nuclear superpower, a designated Eurasian empire within its very own, living with very own values, based on orthodox conservative values, values opposite to those in the West. This is how he positioned himself, his country, and how he positioned his politics in relation to the West. And I think this is what we missed early on. And after this, it only got worse. We had Crimea, the annexation. We had undeclared war in eastern Ukraine starting right after the annexation of Crimea. We had Syria. We had the meddling of his cyber warriors into the American elections, and so on and so forth. So in hindsight, I mean, we are always more clever, more intelligent, so to say. In hindsight, we underestimated, I think, the power of a narrative that he himself, I would guess, started to believe in. His contempt for the West, his level of grievance, his building of conspiracy theories. And this is what we missed also in respect to his claim over influence, geopolitical influence, military influence, political influence, and in the very end also moral influence over Ukraine. We should have, in hindsight, reacted probably more strongly early on. 2014, 2015. This holds true also for Germany, and a fateful decision, for example, to start Nord Stream 2 in 2015 after the annexation of Crimea. But now he has torn all of us into his reality, a reality of war.
Thank you so much, Katja. This was truly interesting, especially how long this fundamental positioning or this positioning as a fundamental antagonist against the West has been going on and seems to have been unobserved. But Mikhail, from the perspective from inside Russia, do you share this assessment that this has been going on for such a long time? And is this assessment, or is this antagonism against the West, is this shared by the Russian population? And what sort of how can we grasp the political situation inside Russia at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Katja. Thank all of you for inviting me here. You know, if you ask me to draw that history line from the beginning, when President Putin first started thinking about the global conspiracy, the Western conspiracy against him, I would go back even further than Katja did. I guess probably the first turning point for him was right in the end of his first presidential term, and that could be year 2004. That happened after the first Ukrainian Orange Revolution, when he was, before that, he was a bit suspicious about President George W. Bush, and he felt really nervous about the Iraq War and about Bush's international doctrine when American president was promising to spread democracy all over the world. But actually, that was the first Ukrainian revolution, when he was really trapped by his advisors, who were sent by his Kremlin spin doctors, who were sent to Ukraine to support pro-Kremlin candidate Viktor Yanukovych, and they totally failed. And they actually, if they were decent people, they should have confessed to President Putin that it all happened because they have stolen all the money and did nothing to support the Kremlin candidate. But on the contrary, they explained it that it all happened because the enemy took much more effort and allocated much more money to support pro-Western candidate Viktor Yushchenko. And actually, that explanation fitted into Vladimir Putin's mindset. And that was the beginning of his paranoia that started growing afterwards. And that was the beginning of his idea that he is being attacked by the West, and that the Ukraine is the major battlefield between him and the United States. If we're talking about the perception of the Russian population, how Russian population feels about the war and has been feeling about the relationships between Russia and the West during these years, that's a long story, and it has been changing through all those years. Katja mentioned year 2011, 2012, those years when huge protest rallies were organized, not only in Moscow, but all across biggest Russian cities. And it was very dramatic change in president's rhetorics, but also it was very dramatic change in his attitude to his people. Symbolically, he fired that time, right during that protests, his chief political strategist Vladislav Surkov, who was in charge of his domestic policy, and whose idea was that the most important power base of the regime should be middle class, should be intellectual, educated, and sometimes even pro-Western people, those people who profited the most from the first decade of Putin's presidency, who have become successful businessmen, or like joined the new middle class of Russia. But those protests showed that Russian middle class, most successful and prosperous and educated Russians, are those to protest the first against Putin coming back as a president. They are not thankful for him. They want Russia to be much more liberal and open and democratic, and they led that uprising against him, and that changed Putin's attitude. He started thinking that he was betrayed by the middle class. He fired Surkov and replaced him with Vyacheslav Volodin, who is now after all those years, he has Russian parliament. And Volodin introduced completely different perspective on the way how Putin should deal with the people and which part of the population he is to rely on. And Volodin's concept was that the working people, the less educated, actually the people who could have been Donald Trump's audience in the United States, that was the equivalent of new Putin's power base after those protest rallies of 2012, and that's why Putin changed his attitude and changed his rhetorics that much. He started saying only that. Only those things that could be popular among much more simple people. At the same time, he, as a paranoid person, definitely, and a person believing into a lot of conspiracy theories, he and the system, the administration of president, the Russian propaganda TV channels started poisoning people with numerous conspiracy theories. Probably I should elaborate on this topic a bit more, but afterwards, the effect of the propaganda TV channels during the last 10 years is enormous. Propaganda has reshaped the psychology of a lot of people, especially those people who have become the target of that attack. The ordinary people, the less educated people from lower classes. So has the attitude changed a lot? Yes, it has changed. What can we say about today's approval or disapproval of the war? It is very different. Russia is not only not polarized and is not divided into two groups, for the war or against the war. It is really divided into a lot of groups with representatives of Russian middle class really devastated and shocked by the war. And a lot of people in the beginning, during the first week of the war, were openly protesting, and then the exodus started, and a lot of people are fleeing right now. According to some estimates, about 500,000 people have left already during the first weeks of the war. At the same time, we definitely see a huge, it could be called a generation gap. Definitely the older generation, those people who got used to watch television, they are much more affected by the war and by state propaganda. And we see a lot of huge family feuds, family tragedies, when older generation, fathers and mothers, are cursing their children for protests against the war. They call them traitors, and it's not one or two or a dozen of those cases. Like almost every family has been ruined by that huge gap between younger people protesting against the war and older people supporting it. But just to finish my analysis of the points of view widely spread in Russian society, I must say that actually we've got lots of different shades. And for example, another very big part of Russian population is neither pro nor contra. Unfortunately, Russian population has been poisoned by cynicism many years ago. A huge part of Russian population does not believe in anything. Probably that applies to the generation of people like me in their 40s or slightly less, or up to their 50s. So that's the most economically active, actually middle class of people are usually more or less of that age. These are the people who grew up during the Soviet period, who were just kids in their early grades of school when Soviet Union collapsed. And finally, without any explanation, they saw that all that religion they were fed with during the first years of their childhood, communism, pictures of grandfather Lenin, the nice red ties, and so on and so on. They did not understand how pathetic all Soviet rituals were. They did not understand all the tragedy of the Soviet Union, as their parents obviously did. But they saw that some rituals they were taught for the first years of their lives collapsed, and they were supposed to believe it, and they were stopped. Then after a few years, they were taught with another religion, liberal values, democratic values, market economy. But unfortunately, the Yeltsin's government and the people surrounding President Yeltsin did their best to ruin all those illusions as well. And all the democratic institutions were ruined, not by President Putin, but by President Yeltsin. The rule of law was not ruined by President Putin, but by the inner circle of President Yeltsin and his family. So unfortunately, that generation of Russians were hurt, were deeply hurt, and their illusions were destroyed for the second time. And now we have that broken generation, broken Russian middle class, or some part of Russian middle class, who chose the way not to believe in anything. They think that everything is fake. They do not trust Putin's propaganda, but at the same time, they prefer thinking that everything else is a propaganda as well. They prefer not to choose between Western propaganda, Putin's propaganda, and Ukrainian propaganda. They just know that any values do not exist. Any human rights do not exist. Freedom of press does not exist. There is no objective to stand up and protest. It's much better just not to believe in anything, and to claim that I'm not interested in politics. So that's another huge part of the Russian population. I could go into much more, into some more interesting details, but probably I should stop for now and listen for some other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja and Mikhail. These were very grim analysis of the past, and to my mind, even more grim when it comes to looking towards the future. You've both mentioned the exodus that is happening from Russia. We are aware of the refugee crisis that this war has caused, and we know that both the Ukrainian refugees and those that belong to the class you just described, Mikhail, they will be sharing neighborhoods in Europe. And one element that comes to my mind when I look into the question of how can we possibly work against such a notion of the future you just described, Mikhail, which means basically there is no merit in believing in a better future because there won't be one. That'll be the essence of the cynicism you described. How can we we as the European countries work against the hatred and between those two people. And Katja, you also mentioned the role of Ukraine, and that is really something that I think we should be worried about. How can one work against the cynical perspective that Putin's war has now catalyzed so strongly? So that would be my one question to you as the moderator. And then after you may have chosen to answer this one, I would ask the participants to join into the discussion. Thank you.
Just two points, Peter and Misha, when it comes to Russia, Russian people, Russian society now. So as Putin cannot build a future for his own people and for his own country, because this would mean to change the structure of power. This would mean to deprive the oligarchs or the ruling elite of its resources and income. He more and more turns back into history. He himself has become the chief historian of his own country, rewriting history, manipulating facts, manipulating developments. And it makes it even easier for this tsunami of propaganda that happens now for people to rally behind a flag of so-called patriotism, of this truly Russian Soviet state of mind. We have to defend our country at any cost. We know that our own rulers, our own presidents, general secretaries, czars, they are not the best. They might be corrupt, they might be cynical, but in the very end, it's our president, it's our czar, it's our general secretary. So we'd rather rally behind him and behind this flag of patriotism. This is why all the memories of World War II, there's the Velika Отечественная война, the Great War of the Fatherland, why this is so important for Putin, the regime, but also for Russian society as one point of identification. This is just one little piece added to Misha's analysis. I have one more point for this time. It's about sanctions. Sanctions can be a very sharp sword. We know that although they might not be targeted against the people, against the population, the people inevitably become victims of sanctions, even more as the sanctions are of such kind and such magnitude as sanctions against Russia are right now. I understand the Western position that this is one of the few instruments we have in order to get Putin or his people at some point to a negotiating table, as long as the table might be. But truly, Russian people become victims of these sanctions. So the least that we can do is to try to keep open everything that is of humanitarian value, everything related to medical instruments, to, in the very end, also to medical devices, to food in the very end as well, so that the sanctions do not hit too hard on people. And second, I very much hope that we in Western countries do not fall into Putin's trap, that now we associate every Russian or Russians with the regime. There is a difference. So to sanction, all cooperation on a sign in science, in culture, to stop the partnerships between cities that survived, since decades, even the Soviet times. I think this is not a good idea because it will be counterproductive in the very end. Just these two thoughts.
Very interesting perspective on the sanctions. I'm sure that'll we'll have a good discussion on that later on as well. So, Mikhail, maybe we can take up Andreas Povel's question because you talked about this. So, what needs to happen for the younger generations to take over and push the older generation aside from inside?
I think that's a very wise question because actually, younger generation is the source of our only hope, and actually, it makes me quite optimistic that in the end, we have never seen a precedent in global history when older generation would prevail over younger generation. We have no doubts that President Putin and his inner circle and Kremlin administration, they are not, they don't understand the new reality. They definitely don't understand the values of the new Russia because they see only those values which are they promoting. At the same time, the younger generation of Russians is very different one. All those people are connected to the global world. A lot of people, like people younger than 25, were literally born with smartphones in their pockets, so they cannot imagine their world without social media, without traveling across the world, without having opportunity to go online for any kind of information they want. So, and definitely we know that creative part of Russian population is trying to fight hard against that North Korean regime Putin is trying to impose with the help of the sanctions. So I have no doubt that in the end, Putin's regime would fail. And just recently, 2 days ago, here in Berlin, we had a small gathering of former Dozhd employees and several Russian independent journalists discussing, and we made bets when we think we'll be able to come back to Russia. And just we had a paper and with all with all forecasts written down. So one day we'll learn who guessed it right. And the forecasts were very different. The most optimistic one was in July. The most pessimistic was 15 years, actually, compared to the fate of those who immigrated from Russia 100 years ago. That is still very optimistic forecast. But anyway, all of us who have fled and all of those who stayed, they are definitely even more optimistic. At the same time, sometimes we find that definitely Putin is interested in Russia being transformed into North Korea, because that is the way for him to isolate the country, to get rid of all those protesters, to consolidate the power. So only the most loyal and the most controlled would remain surrounding him. And that's okay for him. That's not okay for the Russian society. For those who believe in his propaganda, those people are losing possibilities to find another information, and they will definitely need that other sources of information when the economic situation becomes worse, when the patriotic hysteria runs out, and we know from history that it's going to fade away. In 2014, after the previous Ukrainian war and annexation of Crimea, the patriotic hysteria lasted for half year, and then the hangovers started. So probably the current abnormal situation in part of Russian society is not going to last long. But at the same time, we see a lot of obstacles for Russian society, and when Katja said that the sanctions are not directed into Russian people, I do not agree. Unfortunately, some sanctions seem to be sanctioned to be focused directly on Russian people. For example, when Google decided to stop paying any money to any producers of content from Russia, that's just what Putin wants. Because during the last decade, YouTube has become the most important platform for independent media. All the quality journalists are working in the social media. They cannot have their newspapers or magazines or TV channels, but they have news websites and YouTube channels, Instagram accounts, and so on. That's why Putin is blocking Instagram and Facebook, and he has not blocked YouTube yet, but on the contrary, YouTube is blocking Russia from its side. And we have those examples of Putin and global corporations or foreign governments are approaching to each other. They are sanctioning Russian people from both sides. Putin's propaganda is exaggerating, of course. Yeah, they tell a lot about anti-Russian bias all over the world. They tell a lot, especially Russian state-owned TV channels. They devote, I guess, 50% of their broadcasting to terrible stories how Russian people are being cancelled all across Europe. That's a terrible exaggeration, but you know and we know that there are some examples of that, and that many Russian artists, many Russian athletes, activists feel that they are equalized to Russian state. They are actually here not because they support Putin, but because they've been fighting against Putin's regime for many years. But after that, they were squeezed into the West. They have fled because of the war, and now they face the same responsibility for his crimes, for their fight against him. The same rather important issue I should mention is the sanctions lists from different from the United States, from European Union. We've got a lot of people in those lists, so-called Russian oligarchs. Obviously, any Russian millionaire is called Russian oligarch, and usually no one pays attention what these people were doing before, where they invested their money, whom they supported, and obviously we can find in those sanctions lists those people who supported state propaganda and those people who supported independent media at the same time. We can see the names of the most close to Putin crooks, and at the same time we can find there those representatives of big business who fled the country, who were trying to support civil society, who were financing Dozhd or other human rights projects, and who would love to support the fight of of free Russian society abroad against Putin's regime, but they cannot do that. They cannot support Russian immigrants in any way because their accounts are blocked, and they are actually are forced to go back to Russia, to that country where they will be called traitors probably in a month or two.
Okay, Mikhail, thank you so much. You've mentioned North Korea, and you said that Putin and Russia is on a path to turn Russia into North Korea. So Wolf Pfeiffer's question is going into that direction. He's asking whether you believe, Katja and Mikhail, whether the Putin regime will fail before nuclear weapons are being used. What is your assumption? Do you think that Putin will be using nuclear weapons, the nuclear option in the current war, or in the war against his chosen enemy, the West, whatever that exactly means to him?
I mean, it's just a most horrifying thought that he might use, not only speak of, which he does for quite some time, but even use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons. As far as we know, at least it's US intelligence assessments, so far there have been no movements into the direction of getting nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons ready. So this is at least a little bit reassuring, and there haven't been any moves from the Western side, especially from the US side, to indicate, that they are on higher alert status. So this is at least a glimpse of optimism. On the other hand, we have to take into account the Russian national security strategy, which implies that nuclear weapons, meaning in this case tactical nuclear weapons, can be used also during a huge conventional war threatening the security of the Russian Federation. That's how it's written down there. It's the so-called escalate to de-escalate strategy. So this is about nuclear weapons, and you ask if the Putin regime might fall before before nuclear weapons might be used. It's very difficult for me to tell, because probably most of us do not know too much about the real inner works of the Kremlin, how Putin makes decisions, on what arguments, facts, propaganda, narratives, whatever he bases his decisions. Apparently, it's only a very few people he trusts or listens to. The only thing I can tell is that, especially in Russia, regimes seem to be strong and stable and powerful until they're not. And this sometimes happens very quickly. If you look back into Russian history, 1905, 1917, and even the fall of the wall and the end of the Soviet Union to a certain extent happened really very quickly. So kind of everything is possible, but the Russian people going out on the street and chasing Vladimir Putin to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, or a palace revolution, a palace coup from the so-called oligarchs taking place, who really see their assets now at least threatened. And it's not only the big pleasure boats, but it's a lot of other resources that they don't have access to right now anymore. So far, at least for me, there is no indication. So what is it, what we can do from here? I mean, being in Germany or in another Eastern European or Western country, so many people leaving Russia now. The brain drain has been going on for years, we also have to say, but now, I mean, with tens of thousands of bright, young, creative people leaving the country, trying to establish a life, as long as it might last, until July or the next 15 years, and work from here for their country. From our side, as you might know, I do work for Reporters Without Borders. We will try with every resource we have to help and support journalists who had to leave the country, to support independent journalism in Russian language, also in Belarusian language, because Belarusian journalists face the same fate, and maybe in the future also Ukrainian journalists who are still in their country and doing work there. We will try to help and support them. We just yesterday we announced the birth, if we might say so, of a fund called Journalism in Exile. And we will try to get together stakeholders and also try to find money for independent Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian journalism, so that they can continue their work in their language for their country, with a technology that can be seen, heard, and felt in their respective countries. So that's at least something we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. Mikhail, you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, just I'll be short in my answer to the nuclear question. You know, I don't believe that Putin is going to use to push the button, because he cannot give an order he doesn't believe it's going to be fulfilled, and he cannot be sure that his officers are the same kamikazes. He cannot be sure that this final lethal order would be implemented. And as he cares a lot about loyalty, and as he's really suspicious and really paranoid about that, probably that would be the last thing he's about to do. And also, thank you, Katja, for what you're doing. That's true. A lot of Russians are coming, and they need that help. They need your support, as well as most of yours. Legal status is an issue. Apartments is a very serious issue, and work. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. And now I have 3 remaining questions. I think I can merge them into 2, and to be mindful of time and to end on time, with the asking you kindly for short answering. So the first question is, this is a dirty, unintelligent 20th century war. And why do you think that Putin so totally overestimated his military? Was it maybe, as one member of the audience asks, the influence of the philosopher Ilyin, who also has been influencing Mussolini and Hitler, and they're thinking about how they can rule the world? The second question is, and that's very different to the one I've asked now, is whether you think that US encouragement of Ukraine to join NATO played a role in Putin's plans. So thank you very much for your answers already.
If I may start, Misha, just Yes, he overestimated the strength of his own military. This happens to presidents who think they can rule the world with their own decisions. He also underestimated the strength, courage, and morale of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army, and he underestimated the unity of the West in delivering not only political support but defensive weapons to Ukraine. The problem is we cannot allow him to win this war because he still has a certain escalation dominance, and he cannot afford to lose the war. So this is a dilemma we'll have to work with from day to day and maybe find, short-term solution on humanitarian corridors or a ceasefire there and there, and hopefully move from there to a better negotiated ceasefire. I will not talk about peace. I'm too pessimistic on that for the time being.
Misha.
I think one more reason for the fact that he was overestimating the might of Russian military is that all the plans were made several years ago. These are not the new plans. They started planning it right after 2014, and actually the intention was to start this war much earlier. And actually, the coronavirus became an obstacle. Otherwise, it happened a couple of years before, and that's why that was one of more reasons they were not considering the real psychological position of the Ukrainian people. Actually, they were creating all those plans during Poroshenko's presidency, and the nation has changed a lot since that time. He has cut off many of sources of information during the last years, especially during the quarantine. So he is himself much more isolated than ever, and not interested in many current problems, especially economic problems of Russia.
Now, thank you very much for this open and frank discussion, which unfortunately cannot provide us with any silver lining to leave this meeting. Possibly the only silver lining that I hope we all can enjoy is the sunshine that is shining outside for us. It is difficult in dark times, and I think what we can take from that is we should not and never stop looking away and fall into the trap Misha described so concisely, the trap of cynicism, and stop believing that a better future is possible. I think if we stand together, that is exactly what we can do. We can create this hope into a better future again. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Katja. Thank you very much, Misha, for being with us today. And let's just look towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Спасибо вам.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Большое спасибо.